I have no James. It's 4 minutes of. I just texted him.
Do you want this light off? Do you want me to call him from your phone?
I just texted him. I checked my emails.
And I didn't see anything in my email. Oh, he would email
Yeah.
you.
I haven't gone live yet, so I don't know if anybody's logged in other. I was just waiting for him to make him a co-host. We got 3 minutes.
Remember, there was a 1 PM, right? I'm trying to remember what we said after the last.
Just having trouble finding the email with the link.
Yeah.
All right, let me send it again. Let's see if I can find it quickly and send it to him.
Was it as a panelist? I could forward the one I
Yeah, the panelist
just clicked.
sent.
This is his email. This is his email.
Visit at jamesponti.com.
Tell me. That's the one for my AOL. Did you? I just sent it. It's from my AOL.
Hey, there you are.
I could not find it all of a sudden. I buried some nested email.
All right, I'm just gonna set you up as co-host.
You know, it shows up, my name shows up because I sent him mine.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
So under James, he has my name.
Gotcha. Okay. All right, I'm gonna send us live and hopefully we're gonna have two classrooms. All the students are virtual, so there won't be any additional visual on the screen.
Okay.
So we'll see what happens.
I hope this has been good for you guys. I worry that there's not enough kids and it's not worth what you put into it.
It's awesome. No, it's awesome. And what I am going to do when we're done is I'm going to send all the media specialists and the teachers whose emails I do have links to all 3 sessions. So it will continue to be a resource for them. So no, this is awesome.
And you have books still to give away, I'm sure, that it's whatever. Okay.
The last batch is being delivered today. So we will have delivered 1,200 books to our middle schoolers by the end of today.
And one teacher did already email us and say, thank you so much. It was wonderful.
Okay. Well,
We got 2. We got one from the 2, one from each session. We got a note from. So, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, students of the Savannah-Chatham County Public School System. The Savannah Book Festival is honored to have you join us for our SBF at Schools event. My name is Tara Setter, and I have the pleasure of introducing you to the award-winning New York Times best-selling author, James Ponti. At the end of our time together with James, you'll have a chance to ask him some questions. For the students at home, you can submit a question by clicking on the Q&A link to ask a question. James was born in Italy. He grew up in Florida, 2 blocks from the ocean. During college, he worked at Walt Disney World on the Davy Crockett Explorer canoes. His joke telling in this job developed him into a writer. After going to college in California, James began writing and producing television shows for Nickelodeon, the Disney Channel, and others. James loves writing, travel, and the Boston Red Sox. He lives with his awesome family in Orlando, Florida. Thanks to a grant from the city of Savannah, you all received a copy of James' latest book, City Spies, Golden Gate. I think you're really going to enjoy this book. Now let's meet the man that wrote it. Please welcome James Ponti.
Hello, everyone. My name's James. I am excited to talk to you. I wish I was there in person because I love Savannah, and that I would have some delicious food tonight because there's a lot of great places to eat in Savannah. I am in Orlando, Florida. This is my house in Orlando. This is the office at the front of the house where I do all my writing, and I look out of the street at all the people who walk by and exercise when I should be exercising. And I'm going to talk today about writing spy books, about my books, and we can talk about anything that you would like to talk about. It is a very unusual year that we are doing everything virtually. I know you are sick of it, I am sure. I know the teachers are. My wife is a teacher here in Orlando, and she cannot wait for summer. She has a countdown every day. She has a dance at the end of the day with the new number. So I'm sure you guys are all the same way. But hopefully we can have a nice discussion about books, a subject that I love very much, and specifically about spy books. So I have the logo up here for MI6, that's British Intelligence, Military Intelligence Group number 6, or section number 6. And for those who've ever seen a James Bond movie, you've heard of James Bond. James Bond works for MI6, and the spies in my book work for MI6. So that's the logo that we start with. We like to get the mood just right. Now we'll get a little music going, right? So this is the James Bond music, right? So this is what we think of when we think of spies. And what is it like to write a spy novel? Well, you might think it's filled with glamour and celebrities and jet setting around the world. Here I am with secret agent Kevin Hart. We had a meeting at a boxing gym up in New York City on a project I was working on. But usually it's not celebrities. Usually it's more goofy. So like here I am with the Peanuts gang in St. Paul, Minnesota. But the way it feels, the way it really is just always overwhelmed, right? I mean, I have assignments and homework, like you have assignments and homework, and I'm late and I'm trying to get them all done. And, they're like, this is the book I'm writing right now. And it's so big and there's so much to it before it turns into this. And I get a nice little break because I do all that by myself in this office. That every now and then I get to talk to school groups or book conventions or festivals. I'm doing a festival tomorrow with a bunch of neat writers, so it's always a lot of fun. So right today, I want to talk a little about City Spies. So City Spies is a series. So the first book, you see on the cover right there, is City Spies. And the series is about 5 kids from around the world. Each of them has fallen through the cracks of their different societies and their cultures. So we have these kids, and they're all adopted by an MI6 agent, a British secret agent who lives in kind of a country mansion castle kind of place up on the coast of Scotland. And he raises these kids he adopts as a family of spies, right? That's what he knows. And so they have homework. They go to school during the day, and they have regular math homework and social studies homework and English homework. But then they come home, and on the weekend, they learn about explosives and eavesdropping and technology and all this kind of stuff. And MI6 sends them on missions around the world in situations where adults would stand out. So that's what the series is about. It's about these spies who blend in where adults can't blend in. The first one, the primary story, took place in Paris, which is why the Eiffel Tower is on the cover. The second one, the primary story, takes place in San Francisco, which is why you have the Golden Gate Bridge. It's called Golden Gate. The third one, you just saw a glimpse of the cover when I held it up. I'm not supposed to show it yet, but it's in Beijing and in Moscow. It's called From City Spies Forbidden City. And but the second one, Golden Gate, is the book that you guys just got, which is amazing that the grant came through for the book festival to give you guys all this book. You don't have to go to the store to buy it, you don't have to order it, you don't have to check it out from the library. All are fine ways to get books, but you get this one just free for you. How great is that? And I will give you a glimpse of what the book is like.
Can they stop a hijacking in the North Sea? They've entered one of the most famous libraries in the world. Outsmarting evil villain chasing them through Alcatraz. These are just some of the questions that face the City Spies. 5 kids from around the globe. A hacker, a magician, a code breaker, a rebel, and a genius. Operating out of a secret location in the north of Scotland, they're the biggest secret in British intelligence. In their first adventure, they went to Paris to match wits with a criminal mastermind determined to release a deadly virus. Now they're back and tracking a double agent across the globe. As they travel from London to San Francisco, they have to risk it all to solve the mystery and save the day. City Spies and Golden Gate. From New York Times bestselling author James Ponti.
Okay, so I'm going to interrupt the presentation for a moment. I know that there aren't 13-year-old spies with MI6, right? I mean, I get that. Some people say, oh, it's all unrealistic like that. It's not as unrealistic as you might think. So The NSA. So the U.S. There are three major spy organizations in the United States. One of them is the CIA. That's the one most people know about. And the CIA stands for the Central Intelligence Agency, and it is the job of the CIA to collect information and whatnot from intelligence and knowledge and past secrets and spy around the world outside of the country. The CIA is not supposed to do anything inside the country. Then there's the FBI, and the FBI is the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and that's like the national police force, but it has spying agencies, and they spy on things within the country. So that's domestic, and then there's one that's international. And then there's the NSA, and the NSA is the National Security Administration. And the NSA is really probably best thought of as a more high-tech kind of thing. They do a lot of coding stuff. So right now you think, okay, well, this is stuff of movies and whatnot. But right now our country is going through this whole thing where computer hackers have hacked into the pipeline that delivers oil to the country, and spies are who fight that. The NSA, the FBI, the CIA are the ones who try to fight and solve this stuff. And the NSA, because it's so much is computer based, actually uses high school students to help do some of the work that they do. They don't talk about this a lot. It's mostly like juniors or seniors. It's a special summer program they have, but it's because you now have, your generation is growing up with computers, and they're so second nature to you that you're able to figure things out, right? You're able to understand things intuitively on a computer that someone my age has had to learn. So they talk about foreign language, and you learn a foreign language, and it's really easier. And it was never easy for me to learn a foreign language. So let me get that out of the way. But my brother speaks 7 languages fluently. He was a diplomat with the US, with the State Department. He was an ambassador. He's great at that. But it's easier to learn a language when you're younger. So you guys have all learned the language of technology from birth, which for me, I am so old that when I went to college, there was a person in my dorm who had a computer, their own computer. And he had it in his dorm room, and people would literally come by in the hallway and look in the door and say, can you show us what it looks like to have your own computer? And we were just amazed at this thing, right? So we've had to learn that as grown-ups. But the NSA realizes this, and as much as they would rather it be grown-ups, sometimes it's like, you know who's better at this? You know who the great hackers are out there? A lot of them are teenagers. And so the NSA uses some teenagers to help them. They don't advertise this much. I'm not saying that what my characters do is totally realistic, but it's not nearly as unrealistic as you might think. And I want you to think about spying. Spying is gone down through history as far back as BC. There always have been spies. The first major spy master in the United States was George Washington. George Washington had, I think it was called the Culper Ring or the Culpeper Ring, and they were revolutionaries because the British had, we were leaving the British in the Revolutionary War. So the British Army, the war, unlike most of the wars that we fought in this country, this war was fought here in the country. And so he needed regular people who lived in New York City to spy on the British. And they had all these amazing things, and they're not fancy in it. It's like one of the codes was a woman would hang certain laundry on her laundry line, and that would say what ships had come into port or not come into port. And one of the most famous spies in American history is a guy named Nathan Hale. Nathan Hale died, was hung for being a spy. This my friend who also is named Nathan Hale writes these amazing graphic novels called Nathan Hale's Hazardous Tales. You should definitely read those. And another friend of mine is named Stuart Gibbs, and he does the spy school books. And one of his characters is the great granddaughter of Nathan Hale. Nathan Hale was 18 when he was captured and killed. So teenage spies may seem like they're unrealistic, but maybe they're not so unrealistic. Now, I want to talk to you about real spies and research. So I do a lot of research in my books. And one of the things that I did to research was, as luck would have it, there is a librarian in Virginia who really likes my books, and she uses them in her school. And her husband is a high-ranking member of the CIA, or retired member of the CIA. And so she put us together and we talked for a while, and he helped me do research on my book. And I asked him to help plan the mission in my book, and he did. And it's like, this is how the mission would really work. But I asked him an important thing, and this is what I wanted to talk to you about now. Is I said, what's wrong with spy movies? What's wrong with spy books? Because I know there are things that are wrong in all these movies and books that, if you've ever meet a police officer, they will tell you it's so unrealistic. In a TV show, they'll be like, oh, look, here's blood. And like 2 minutes later, someone will say, that blood belongs to so-and-so. And it really takes a lot longer than that. You really can't tell all the things like they do on CSI or whatever like that. So I said, what are the things that drive you crazy in spy movies? What are the things that make you upset and you wish were different? He said, one is that in spy movies, they think that the CIA or the MI6 or the DGSE, whatever, which is the one in France, or Mossad in Israel, can just do anything. And they can't just do anything. They don't have unlimited powers, unlimited resources. And by acting like they do, we do them a disservice to realize how amazing it is they do what they do, because they have to solve problems and do this. Another is, he says that he hates it. In the movies, they're always wrong. The spies always have the wrong information. There's always one person who no one listens to the whole time. And that person saying, no way, I think I can solve it. And that person solves it. And we love that person. And boy, aren't those agents lucky. And he says, it's not like that. That really, that the people that do this job, or most of them, are really pretty amazing people. And they are right, or they say they don't know, but they're not always wrong. The third thing is that there's never rules. Everyone's breaking the rules, or they're off on their own secret missions. And he said that just doesn't happen, because it can't happen, right? So those are the three. But the biggest thing that drove him crazy, that he thought was wrong, was he said spying is about analysts and not operatives, right? That analysts are the people who look at information. Operatives are the people who get information, and that what he called the tip of the spear, the leading edge of spy work, is done by the person who has all this different information from different operatives and figures it out, like when you're doing a jigsaw puzzle. And so I try to and I told him, I said, well, here's the problem with that. Is the book's much more fun if they're racing around the world, jumping off of buildings and doing all that, than if they're just sitting at a desk. So I will try to be sensitive to that, but you're going to have to realize I can work on the first three, but the fourth one, it's still, it's still going to be kind of operatives. And those are the spies that we know from movies, right? So let's go back. Let's get our music going again, right? So here's our James Bond music. Here's our MI6 logo. And when you say spy, this is what we think of. We think of James Bond, right? Tuxedo, dapper, clever line, has a gun in his hand, always ready to fight, always ready to break women's hearts. Or maybe more recently, we think of Jason Bourne, right? And I love the Jason Bourne books, but Jason Bourne can drive across Europe in a Volkswagen and have 75 fist fights and dive off a cliff and go over a bridge and swim under the ocean and jump from the top of a building to the window of the next building and then have breakfast, right? And that's all Jason Bourne. Or even like Tom Cruise in the Mission Impossible movies. Tom Cruise is there and he's dangling and dancing like a ballerina in the air and a puppet and he's doing all that stuff. That's not what spies are like. I mean, there might be some people do that. There might be some of that happens, but that's not what they're like. So what I thought would be fun to do today would be to talk about some real spies, to introduce you to some real spies. So we're going to start with Mo Berg, right? If you ever met Mo Berg, he is the opposite of Jason Bourne and James Bond and Ethan Hunt, who's the character in Mission Impossible. Mo Berg was a Major League Baseball player. He played for, I think, I'm blanking on the teams because he played for multiple teams. I think Philadelphia, I think Washington, and maybe Detroit, but I got those teams wrong. You can look him up. Mo Berg is actually a really great person for you to look up. He was really smart. He spoke multiple languages. He loved the newspaper. He would get something like 5 or 6 newspapers every day. And he traveled with the baseball team. And, not all baseball players want to read newspapers from around the world. He would get them all and he would sit in the lobby of the hotel. And he would sit in the lobby of the hotel and he'd read and no one was allowed to touch his newspaper until he was done. And he'd read it from the front page to the back page. When he was done, he'd drop it and said, "It's dead." And if anyone wanted the paper, they could take it. And so he'd read these newspapers and then he'd go. And he, to be honest, he wasn't a particularly great baseball player, but he was he's a Major League Baseball player. And then leading up into what became World War II, a lot of stuff going on in Japan, a lot of stuff that we didn't know about in Asia, because we hadn't had a lot of relations there and we didn't have people there. But you know what they like in Japan? They love baseball. So they arranged for some traveling teams. This is like in the 30s, some traveling teams to go of all-stars like Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, these hugely famous baseball players all went to Asia to play in these games. And Moberg, and here is the letter from William Donovan, who was the director of the OSS, which became the CIA. Moberg went and contacted them and said, because I know languages, because I'm smart, because I know these things, I can go to Japan and I can spy for you. And so Moberg was added to this all-star team. It would make no sense. Think of it like this. It's like if they made Ocean's 14, the next Ocean's 11 movie, and it was Brad Pitt, George Clooney, Matt Damon, and me. Like I was the fourth one on the team, right? That's what it was like, Moberg being on this team with Babe Ruth and Bob, all these amazing baseball players, and Moberg. But the Japanese didn't know that, or they didn't pay attention to that, or whoever. He's just the guy on the team. And so he went and he traveled around, and the games, I think, would be in the day. Whenever the games weren't being played, he would act like a tourist with his camera walking around. And what they didn't know is that the OSS had given him a special camera and instructions. And he went on the tops of hotels and buildings and took pictures that were later used to prepare for the potential of being at war. So it's not Ethan Hunt dangling from wires, hacking into a computer. It's a lot more anonymous than that. And the thing that's great about it is that no one's ever going to think Moberg's a spy. So how perfect is that? Here's the next one. Oh, my favorite, Virginia Hall. So Virginia Hall grew up in a fancy family, lots of money, and near DC, and I think in Maryland is where she lived, and her family was connected to the government, and she spoke tons of languages. She was great at language. She was really smart. She was really adventuresome. But she's really rich, right? So she's not someone who has to worry about going and fighting in the war, because women didn't go fight in World War II. And she wanted a life of adventure. She wanted to work for the State Department, and the State Department kept rejecting her. And what happened was she went on a hunting trip, outdoors trip, and an accident happened, and her leg was shot, and they had to amputate her leg and give her an artificial leg, which she named Cuthbert. She actually named the leg Cuthbert. And Cuthbert was her artificial leg. And at that point, the State Department said, we're not going to hire you because you can't go in a foreign country with only one leg. Right? A lot of prejudice. We talk about inclusion and access for people with different disabilities. They had no, well, she was determined. So she had friends. So she went to England. And she got a job as a secretary there, and she worked her way, and she eventually got the group that became MI6. It was called SOE at the time, that she could do this stuff. And they couldn't believe it. Like there were high-ranking people there that said, we can't really be doing this, right? But they snuck her into France, and she became a spy. A woman who was about 6 foot tall, who walked with a limp because she had an artificial leg. You'd think she would blend in. And she was considered by the Nazis the most effective spy from America. And she ended up spying for the British, and she spied for the Americans. She would hide things in her artificial leg. She had to cross the Pyrenees to escape to Spain at one point because they had trapped her in France, and she's having to climb mountains with her artificial. This woman who did not have to do any of this stuff. And there's a lesson, a thing from the report. The woman who limps is one of the most dangerous Allied agents in France. We must find her and destroy her. There was a huge bonus put for anyone who could capture. And a couple of times she was arrested and they couldn't find any proof that she had done anything. And so she ended up, and she never told anyone. They didn't find out that she had done this until like 30 years after the war. And she ended up coming back and doing all kinds of stuff for the CIA and its founding. And it was this woman with one leg who just cared about freedom and what was right. Again, it's hardly James Bond in a tuxedo racing around in an accident here, a car. Maybe my all-time favorite spies are the Navajo Code Talkers. So the Navajo Code Talkers, in World War One, they had done there was a code breaking is a huge part of war and a huge part of spycraft. I come up with a code that you can't crack, and then I can communicate. And even if you intercept the message, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what happens. And sometimes you come up with clever codes, like the one I told you, the culprit ring, where I'm going to hang this. If I hang this blanket on the shelf, that means something. If I hang, but people can figure that stuff. But that you need like codes that can be used all around. So the Great Quest was an unbreakable code, right? No one thought there was such a thing because every code could eventually be broken if you had enough time and enough resources. But there was one code that has never been broken in the history of warfare. I mean, ever, going back thousands of years. Only one code remained unbroken. And it was actually not just Navajos. There were Hopi, there were, I think, Apache. In World War One, they had done this. But early on in World War II, there was a Marine whose father, who was white, but he grew up on a Navajo Indian reservation. And he learned to speak Navajo, which is a very rare language that very few people spoke, and almost no one who wasn't Navajo could speak it. In fact, they think at the start of World War II, there were only 30 people in the world who weren't Navajo who could speak Navajo. And why that's important was it was unlike any other languages. English and German have overlap, and French and Italian have overlap. And if you know a little bit, you can begin to understand the language. Navajo had nothing, that even the people from the next Indian reservation over couldn't understand any of it. So they realized if you had people who could speak that on both ends, say, of a phone call, they could come up with phrases. And so what they did is they came up with terms, and they would find words. So like they would do for letters, they would do for the letter R, they would think of a word that started with R, rainbow. And they would say the Navajo word for rainbow, which would mean nothing to anyone else. But the person who spoke Navajo on the other end of the phone call knew it was rainbow and knew that meant R. And a code that they did it as a test because this guy had this idea, and they went and they got these volunteers after Pearl Harbor, and they come in and they did, and something that took 30 minutes to do by two machines doing code, which was at the time lightning fast. The Navajo code talkers were able to pass the message in 20 seconds. And they became this incredible spying thing. And this is the first class, right? These Navajos enlisted in, and that's pretty amazing when you think about our country's history with Native Americans is not great. There's a reason that they might not want to defend the country that didn't treat them well, and this group did, and they did, and they were incredibly effective, and they would split up, and they would have one. After they learned some phrases like submarine was iron fish in Navajo, and they learned some things like that. Destroyer, because there was a lot of naval stuff, because it was the Pacific was that war was mostly fought in the ocean. The destroyer was called shark, the Navajo word for shark. And so they learned these things, and they would travel each Navajo with one Marine, and the Marine was to protect them. And here's the horrible thing: the final job of the Marine was, if they were captured, was to kill his friend, because they couldn't let anyone who spoke the language be captured by the enemy. Luckily, that never happened. They never had to do that. and they were incredibly effective, and it is the only code that was never broken. These young men, and it's all because they knew their culture, and it was highly effective during World War II. So I love them. Then we have this next group. So talking about code still, the key to the British, the Nazi code, the Germans were our enemies in World War II. The key to that was this machine. It was called an Enigma machine. And the way the Enigma machine worked was it was the most advanced. You think about the computers we have now. This was the most advanced server farm computer in the world, all rolled into one. This little keyboard, you would press buttons. So you'd press a button, like if you wanted to spell my name, you'd press the J button. But that J button would hit a spark that would go through all these wires and these rotors that were always turning in the back, and it would come out, and then on this little screen right here, the X would light up. That somehow this Enigma machine turned J into X. And it's very complicated. You don't have to understand it, but just to give you an idea, it would work like this. So you press, like here, it's an A. You press the A button, and the A would go here, and then electrical charge would turn that into an M. And then the M would go through here, and these rotors that were always turning would turn the M into a B, into a J, into an F, into a P, into an N, to an X, to an O, and the O back into an H, and then the H light would light up. And every day, the code for the rotors changed. So that meant every day, there was 24 hours starting at midnight where you could try to break the code. And if you couldn't break this incredibly complex code by midnight the next night, it was over. It didn't matter. It couldn't help anymore. And a group of people, and this is a picture from a building in a place called Bletchley Park. Bletchley Park is outside of London, and it was a mansion. It's real estate, and it's located right in between the two most famous universities in England, Oxford and Cambridge, because they wanted all the mathematicians they could get. And they got all these mathematicians, and Bletchley Park became the center of code breaking for the universe. And it was 70% women, because so many men were fighting in the war, and all these women had a chance to go do the, and they would have contests, like they'd have crossword puzzle contests, and the winners, they would say, come here, do this, and they'd be sworn to secrecy on their life. And they came in this hut right here, hut 11A, a man named Alan Turing used this machine called the bomb, which sounds like the bomb, like it blows up, but it's spelled with an E at the end. And all these dials were trying to duplicate those little dials in an Enigma machine. And every morning they would start trying to break the code, and it took them years, and they were finally able to figure out how to do it. And these were not, this is them. This is Alan Turing. And these are the women that worked in Bletchley Park in this picture right here. And it's not James Bond. It's not Jason Bourne. It's regular people. You just look at all just over these papers, and they had to keep it secret forever. I told this story. I went, those pictures in Bletchley Park, I took them when I was doing my research for the books, and I went there, and in that hut with that machine, this one right here, in the hut, they were giving a tour, and the secrets oath didn't end the war, because at the end of the war, they didn't want people to know they knew how to break this code. The same with the Navajos. No one knew about the Navajos until like the 1980s. That's 40 years after the war. No one knew about the women at Bletchley Park. And so these women who'd done all these amazing things, then were expected to go back and be housewives and never let anyone know that they had helped win the war. And a woman was on a tour. She was in her 80s. And the man told me that he was part of this, that he was giving the tour. And he said, and she looked at the way that all the plugs were done, and she said, your plugs are wrong. And the guy goes, what? And he goes, your plugs are wrong on the bomb. And he goes, well, how do you know that? And she goes, because I worked in this hut. I know what it was really like. And her husband, who she'd been married to for 30 years, was like, you worked here? You were at Bletchley? We had no idea. And she said, yes, I couldn't tell you. And he goes, no, I know you can't tell me. I worked here too. I worked at a hut just like a couple rows over. And they had all during the war, before they even knew each other, had been working on this incredible secret mission. So I bring this up because you think about spies, and one of the great things, we talk about inclusion. We talk about people with different abilities and people who are overlooked. Alan Turing was secretly gay. This was the thing that was not allowed to be. It was against the law in England at the time. He was a mathematician, nerdy in the eyes of people, non-heroic guy. These women were women, and women didn't get involved in war. The Navajos were, people would make, people didn't think that the Native Americans had all this. A one-legged woman, these are people who are overlooked by society in a lot of ways, became the first great spies. And it was, the interesting thing was, it was the fact that they were overlooked. It was the fact that no one paid attention to Mo Berg when Lou Gehrig and Babe Ruth are there, that made them great spies. And that's why the guy from the CIA said, spies aren't the guys in the fast sports car shooting guns and doing tricks. The people you overlook. And that's what I wanted to write about. And that's what my book's about. And I think no one's more overlooked than kids, right? We don't realize how smart kids are. So I wanted to write a story where the spies were kids, where the spies were, and these are kids who've been struggled in their different cultures, their different communities, and they get adopted and they form a family, which I think is the strongest thing in the world. Not necessarily your blood relative family, but a family of people who rely on each other and love each other and whatever. And so I wanted to write about that. I wanted to write about those people. So I think of everyone's a character, and every place is a setting, and every picture tells a story. And this picture tells the story of, well, I got ahead of myself there. So the first books I wrote were about zombies. The next book I wrote were about detectives, and then this picture. So this is a picture on a trip my wife and I took to go visit our son the year he went to college in England. So we went to college in England, and we went to visit him. And we went the day I finished this book, a couple hours vanished. A couple hours later, we hopped on a plane and we flew to London. And we woke up the next morning we woke up on the plane and we arrived in London. And we met our son. We were so excited. And one of the first things we did was go to Buckingham Palace, which is where the Queen lives. And I'm always writing. That's my job. And I just turned in a story. So it's time to come up with the next story. And I start looking around at all these amazing locations. I thought, wow, England would be a great place to set a story, because it's neat, it's different. Like this house that I'm in right now is 95 years old, which in Orlando, Florida makes it one of the oldest buildings in Orlando. In England, you see buildings that are 1,000 years old. It's like, I want to set with that. And then we went to this underground bunker, which was where, and we took a tour. So World War II really interested me. My wife's a history teacher, really interested her. The underground bunker is where Winston Churchill ran the country secretly during the war when he had to make sure he couldn't. And we went on this tour where the people hid when the bombs would drop, because unlike here, we had that happen at Pearl Harbor, but in London, they had that happen night after night after night for months, right? And I started thinking about the spies and all the things they did, and we learned about them. And then a couple of days later, we were in Paris, and then you learn about the French underground and all the things they did. And so Europe and spies led me to think about a book about spies. And so that trip became this book. So you see Paris and Paris. Our next family trip to San Francisco, which actually had its spies. And San Francisco has all kinds of secret tunnels, and Alcatraz, which when you read the book, you'll see there are tunnels underneath Alcatraz. There's all kinds of cool stuff in San Francisco. And so that
Hang with us for just a second. We're having some technical difficulties. We're going to try and get James back online. Hang on for just a second.
Oh, I'm back. Can you guys hear me okay? Yeah, okay. So they're kids from around the world, and each kid has to cut away their past when they join the team. But the one thing they get to keep from their past is the name of the town that they're from. And that becomes their code name. And that way, when you read it, you'll know, oh, Paris is the one from France and Sydney's the one from Australia. And it's easier to keep them track in your head. So these are and because they are named after cities, they're called the City Spies. And here you are, you can meet them. Ah. So those are the City Spies. There's Brooklyn. And what I tried to do is when I came up with the cities, I tried to think of what would be their special skills from those cities. Brooklyn is my computer hacker. So she's the closest to reality because, like I said, there are teenage computer hackers who work for the NSA. Paris is my genius chess player, the hero who can solve things. Sydney is my righteous rebel, great athlete from Australia. Rio is my entertainer, my he works, he understands people better than anyone else, and he knows magic really well, which seems like an odd choice, but actually the CIA very early on had top magicians come and teach agents magic because all the tricks that they use on magic, all the skills of palming a card or hiding a thing, all work great for CIA operatives. And then Kat is from Kathmandu, and she is my math genius. She sees the world in numbers. She's neuroatypical or neurodiverse or whatever different terms for that. And that makes her an excellent code breaker. And they are City Spies. And I am James. I write their books. And we have time for some questions. If you guys have any questions, if you don't, that's all right. But yes, so any questions?
I have one that came in from, I think, Ozil. I apologize if I pronounced the name wrong. And you brought up a little bit how you came up with your idea. I didn't know if you could expand upon it. How did you come up with the idea for City Spies?
Well, it's books and ideas I like to think of them as rooms. Right? So the room is all of the story. And the trick is getting into the room. Sometimes you go through the door, sometimes you go through the window, sometimes you break through the ceiling. There's different ways. Sometimes it's a character. I want to write a character who's really good at solving mysteries. Sometimes it's a plot. I want to write a story about kids on a secret mission. And so those have the different entry points to the room. But once you get in the room, it's all about looking around and asking. So it's like, okay, so I knew I wanted to write spies in big cities, going in worldwide cities, and I knew each cover I wanted to have a different landmark, so you would instantly know that's the book in Paris, that's the book in San Francisco. So I had the idea of that, but then it became that's just the window to get in the room. Then the idea itself comes from asking questions. Well, okay, how many are there going to be, and where are they going to be from, and why are kids doing this? Which, like I said, it's a bit unrealistic. So because of the unrealistic nature of what I write, I believe everything else has to be super accurate. That's why I do the research. That's why I go to the places. That's why I talk to spies. And for this one, I just talk to people who grew up in Moscow. And I want it to be at the end that even if at the beginning you said this is so unrealistic, at the end you go, maybe it's not as unrealistic as I think. But why? So I came up with the idea of why it is. I don't want to spoil parts of the plot, but why it is that they were formed as a team and how that team came to be. And so it all becomes questions and more intricate question. Each answer is a more intricate question, and eventually you ask yourself a question that can only be answered by the book. And by that point, I had a team, I had them form their family in Scotland, and they're going around the world. But the big question I had to figure out is what types of mysteries. And I wanted them to solve mysteries that impacted kids, because I wanted the kids who read it. So the first book, they're going in and they're really looking into this summit on the environment, and there's a virus involved. I didn't know we would have a worldwide virus the week after my book came out, but those questions, and that's where the ideas come from. Just one question leads to another.
Okay. How do you deal with writer's block?
Writer's block is different things for different people, but I think most people, if they haven't been writing, they just heard the term. Think of it as, I have no idea. I'm looking at a blank page and I have no idea. I think of writer's block as cereal. So by that, I mean, if my house, if I went back there to the kitchen and I wanted to get cereal, I've got two to choose from. There's Life cereal and there's Great Greens. And that's the two cereals that are in the house right now. And it's easy to pick one or the other. I feel more like that, or I feel more like that.
Yeah.
But if you go to the grocery store and you're buying cereal, and there's 100 different cereals on the shelf, it's overwhelming. And then it's like when you try to pick a restaurant, or like your family's trying, where do you guys want to go to lunch? Oh, I want pizza. Oh, I don't really want pizza. What do you want? I don't know. I want burritos. Oh, I don't really want burritos. I don't know. That sounds okay. And that's what writing is. It's that writer's block. It's okay, but it doesn't sound like, oh, definitely that's what I want. So the trick you have to develop is when you have to learn how to see, is it really an issue of you don't know what you want? In which case, then you have to just pick something and go with it and realize you may go in the wrong direction for a little bit. Or you have to think, is the writer's block really my subconscious writer's brain telling me, you took a wrong turn 3 pages ago, and the further you go wrong, the further you're going to have to go back. So in that way, it's like a trip, and I'm the dad driving the car, and my wife's saying, didn't you want to turn back there? No. I've been to Savannah a million times. You take exit 99 off of I-95, and it's east, right? And I've been going west. Right? So sometimes it's that. And the way you deal with it is you just have to accept that it's not perfect, and that's okay. It's not perfect.
I have another question. Do you have a step-by-step method at all? Like creating a theme, story moral, and then story arc, then an outline?
Boy, wouldn't that be great? That would be great. No, I know how to do it, and I don't mean to make light of that. I know I can sit down and write a book, and I know I can, like 3 weeks ago, I thought I needed one more idea to give my agent and editor. I've given them 2 so they can think about what else I can write, because I want to write City Spies and I want to write another book every year. I want to go back and forth. And I said, I'm going to go for a walk and come up with the idea. And I felt pretty confident that I could go for a walk and I could come up with a really strong idea, because I've done it enough. And I ended up sitting on a bench and looking at the lake, and I came up with the idea, and I love it. And I think it's really good. Now it's going to take a while to develop that. So yes, there's certain things you can do, but there's no great recipe. And every time it's different. So this one City Spies started with the situation. This one I'm writing now, I'm thinking about now for the future, started with a character. There's a murder mystery that I'm writing, started with crime, and it's for high school kids. And I don't know when it's going to come out, because I sold it 8 years ago and I still haven't written it, but maybe it might be the next thing I write. And it is, so it's always different. And then it's slogging through the hard part, the hill to get over is the voice. Every book is a different voice. Now, it's great when you write series like I do. The series has a continuous voice. So once you have it, you have it. But finding that voice can take a week. It can, in Dead City, the first book I wrote, I didn't know better. It took a day. I had the voice, and it boom. Framed took months to find the voice. So there is no great pattern for me. But once I get the voice, I'm usually in pretty good shape. And then I build to, towards the end, I don't do a huge outline, but when I know the whole story, I'll make a board like this. So these are all the chapters in City Spies 3. And each chapter is color coordinated by which character is the main character in that story, with blue being ones with all of them in it. And that's so I can visually just look at the story instead of looking at a computer at one page. And I can sit back and I can say, boy, there's no yellow for a while. That means that Sydney's disappeared from being a strong character for, 50, 60 pages. That's not good. And it helps me able to see the big picture. Oh, you're suddenly muted.
Yes, I am. I'm sorry.
Okay, there you go.
Can you define voice in this, what the voice is?
Sure. What's the best way to do it? Okay.
Like,
I read out loud when I write.
mm-hmm.
And my friends that I grew up with, it's really funny. It's really sweet. A lot of them write and say, when I read the book, it sounds like you're talking to me. So this is my voice. I wrote this in my voice. Sarah looked at the water stain on the wall and imagined it was an island. She wasn't sure if that was because it actually looked like one or just because she so desperately wished she were in some tropical paradise far from Brooklyn in this tiny room on the 8th floor of the Kings County family court. That may not seem like much. That's actually one of my favorite sentences that I've ever written. My favorite. I love that paragraph for whatever reason. But that tone that you heard in my voice is the tone and the type of information that the whole book unfolds for. Dead City, first book I wrote. You're probably wondering why there's a dead body in the bathroom. I hate zombies. I know that sounds prejudiced. I'm sure some zombies are really nice to kittens and love their parents, but it's been my experience that most are not the kind of people you want sending you friend requests. Consider my current situation. Instead of eating pizza with my teammates as I celebrate my surprise victory at the St. Andrews Prep fencing tournaments, I'm trapped in a locker room toilet stall with a dead body, right? So it sounds different than the other. It starts with kind of a joke. It is the voice of a 12-year-old girl with a certain level of intelligence and a certain attitude, and she is telling the entire story. That voice is very different than this voice, and it takes a while to get it, My favorite book of all time for the Mix-Up Files is basically Frank Weiler. Claudia knew that she could never pull off the old-fashioned kind of running away. That is, running away in the heat of anger with a knapsack on her back. Well, that's a different voice too, right? Now, this is now kind of like, because this one is actually being told by the older woman who found out about the story as opposed to the main character in the story. And so she's telling it kind of in a enlightened, let me tell you the story of this girl, Claudia, and tell you. So the voice is the language, the humor, the sense of humor, the vocabulary, and the rhythm. I do simple sentences, I do complex sentences, I do incomplete things. That's all part of the voice. And that's actually the advantage for me, is because I spent so much time writing television, I constantly had to write in the voice of different characters. And you learn how to sort in your head how James talks versus how Erica talks versus how Tara talks, so that you can write it and come back and forth from one to the other. But for a book, so now for the book, what I have to do is I have to do the voice of the book, but then I have to do the distinct voice in City Spies of 8 different characters with distinct voices throughout, and then others that pop up. And it has to be consistent, and kids will call you, or my editor will say, you have Kat saying something in this scene that I don't believe for 1 second comes out of Kat's mouth. And I look at, oh, you're right, that's bad. That's more like what Sydney would say. All right. And so she marks that, and I go through and I fix that. So voice is, to me, as important as anything in a book. Because you think about it, there's a lot of books, like Framed is about art theft. and you have maybe 10 really good kids books about art theft. Well, they're not the same because the voice changes. The voice is the key that makes them all unique and different. A longer answer than you wanted. I'm sorry. You're muted again.
It taught me something. So do we have time for maybe one or two more questions?
Okay.
Is there a favorite book from your childhood that hooked you on reading?
So that one I just saw from the Mixed Up Files was basically Frank
Okay.
Weiler. And what this is, though, what's special about it, for me, so the plot is a girl named Claudia and her brother run away from home, and they don't just run away from home. They run away. They live in Connecticut. They take the train into New York City, and they hide out in the Metropolitan Museum of Art for like a week. And I loved, and while they're there, they uncover a mystery about whether or not, I think it is, a statue was created by Michelangelo. And what I loved about it was this, I was not a kid who ever broke rules. I could never run away, I would never run, but it was a real place. So even though it was fictional, they went to a real place. And then I knew that if I went to New York, I could see not only the Metropolitan Museum of Art, but I could see the works of art she was talking about. And that combination not only captured my attention as a reader, it has captured me as a writer forever. That's what I told you. I write these fictional stories and I set them in real places. A lot of people write books in the future in fictionalized versions or in generic, could be any town, USA. I want books that are set in specific real places that you could go to. First time I went to New York, I went straight to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and I went inside to buy a copy of the book at their gift shop because I wanted a copy from the place where Claudia lived to give to my son for when he was old enough to read. I wanted him to have a real, legitimate copy from the Mixed Up Files. So that was the book that really, really hooked me.
Well, I don't see any other. Let me see if we have any other questions.
Well,
Yeah,
put up with me for about an hour, so that's.
Yeah, I think we're close to finishing up. We got them all.
All right.
Let me just add, a couple of you have asked about your copies of the book. So it appears that some of the virtual students have not gotten the copies. They were delivered to your librarian. So communicate with your teacher about how they're going to coordinate your picking up the copy of your book. Because we definitely would love to have you have it for the summer.
And I hope you. I hope you like the book. But if you don't, that's fine. There are other books you like. It can't be that I write a book that everyone would like. And part of that's that voice thing. That voice will connect with some people. Maybe Stuart Gibbs's voice would connect with others. Maybe someone would like both. Maybe Beth McMullen, she writes spy books. There are books out there for you. They're graphic novels, they're comic books, they're novels, they're nonfiction books. There's all kinds of stuff. We are still, it's getting better, but we're still kind of locked down in this country. And one of the great things that we have learned over the last 15 months is that with all the computers, with all the technology, with all the television movies, boy, that the invention of the book is still pretty solid, because books have weathered this better than anything else. Books have continued to do well. And while we have been locked up in our houses, books have been able to take us around the world. Books have been able to connect us with people. And it's really, really quite lovely and wonderful component about that. So, I hope you get to go places soon and do all that. But you could go if you go to the library, you could go, or if you read this book, you could go to San Francisco. It starts off, I'm going to read you the opening. This will be the last thing. I'll read you the opening of Golden Gate to tell you where it starts off. So it starts off in the North Sea. It was just after dawn, so the black-clad hijackers were barely visible as they moved with military precision across the deck of the Marine research vessel Sylvia Earle. There were 7 of them, and they wore special non-slip tactical shoes that gripped the damp metal surface, and balaclava ski masks that concealed their identities and shielded them from the cold ocean air. Virtually all the ship's passengers and crew were still asleep, so the intruders faced no resistance as they stormed the bridge and caught the duty officer by surprise. Someone had complained to me that the first book, it took too long for there to be action. So there on page 1, you are instantly in a hijacked ship in the freezing North Sea, and the adventure begins, and it does not stop until you get to San Francisco many pages later. Have a great summer. You guys are heroic by what you've done this year. It's been such a hard year for teachers and for students. So students, congratulations on doing that. Thank your teachers, because they have had to reinvent what they do every day, you know, just to make it through this. And thank you for reading, and thank you to the Savannah Book Festival for arranging this and for getting that wonderful grant to get you books, because I love knowing that people in Savannah, right near, you know, I grew up in Jacksonville, just 60 miles away, that people up there are reading my book, and hopefully they're going to like it. And even though we don't meet in person, if you've read my book, we're friends. So have a great day, friends, and have a great and wonderful summer.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right.